So hello, I'm John Kane, and I welcome you to Let's Talk Native on this Saturday, February 22nd, 2020. Lots of twos there. Well, this program may not provide a path to spiritual enlightenment. We do encourage, and in some cases, start conversations. We kind of break the rules here for Native Radio. We don't do prayers, and we don't do public speeches. We take a tough look at history, oppression, and survival. And we talk about culture, and arts, and politics, and identity. And we may step on a few toes along the way. We may step on a few tonight. But our real goal here is to bring people together by breaking down what separates us. We will take on the false narratives, and we will provide critical thinking to all that is heaped upon us. And we do it all right here, live from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. So let's talk Native. First, let me remind everybody that we stream the show on our website, which is www.letstalknative.com. That's the audio. On video, we stream it on our Facebook group page and share that on a bunch of other group pages. And we do that via Facebook Live. We take the audio and we put it up as a podcast after the show. We do that via SoundCloud. And we take the video and we put it up on our YouTube channel, which is Let's Talk Native TV. So there's many ways to watch it. There's a couple of ways to catch the show live and even more ways to catch it after the fact. So again, you can just search Let's Talk Native podcasts with John Kane. Let's Talk Native with John Kane podcast, and you can find this show and my shows I do in New York. In fact, we put on that same podcast. So I'm the host, and I'm joined here in studio by Jake Proud, who's managing our video and our audio. All right. Obviously, I've got to talk about the Cayuga stuff, but let me do a bit of an update because the whole issue with Wet'suwet'en territory and the railways that are blocked, that's not over by any stretch of the imagination. The only things that have changed is, all that sweet talk that Justin Trudeau put out, when they did their House of Commons speech. 2 days later, it's like, all right, we've had enough. These blockades got to end, and we're going to, send in the RCMP. I mean, he's saying 2 days earlier, wow, we can't really tell the RCMP what to do, and we've got to have compassion. I'm offering my hand, as a gesture of reconciliation and peace and friendship. And then 2 days later, he's saying, oh, hell no, this has got to end. So that was Justin Trudeau. In the meantime, some of the folks who are engaged in this resistance of the pipeline going through Wet'suwet'en territory, including some of the folks who people are calling hereditary chiefs, but traditional chiefs, and some of the other folks came out to Mohawk territory. And they came out specifically because Mohawk territory is where a lot of these rail blockades began, and the most significant blockades are happening within Mohawk territories. Tyendinaga in particular, but not exclusively there. Kahnawake, they've been blocking the rails. I think even a group of Senecas went down and walked on the railroad tracks today. But so these guys came out and they met with the folks in Tyendinaga, and then they went out to Kahnawake, and they come out in the wake of the RCMP claiming, oh yeah, we'll pull out of there as long as you let the pipeline workers back in, which is it's a stupid and ridiculous offer. I mean, the reason the RCMP is there is because the people aren't letting the pipeline go through the territory. So to say, well, if you let it go through, we'll leave. Oh, that was obvious. So here's the situation. With the message that has been delivered, both by the Mohawks and the Wet'suwet'en people, is there's nothing that's going to happen until the RCMP pull out. Until the RCMP pulls out of Wet'suwet'en territory, and that means everything. Their trailers, their all their vehicles, all that. Until they are no longer there or on the perimeter, there's nothing to talk about. And what the Mohawk people, the Mohawk communities that have been blocking these rails are saying, until these Wet'suwet'en representatives go back home and tell us that you're gone, and that there's no more the pipeline folks, these folks who are pushing this pipeline through are gone, we're not moving either. Now, in the meantime, there have been some efforts. I think one group actually got sued. They tried to name them in a lawsuit for doing a blockade, and they didn't. I mean, it doesn't matter. I mean, these guys say, you're going to sue me for this? And then it turns out, I think something to do with the way the papers were served or written up was wrong anyway. But it's kind of a joke. But I want people to understand that nobody has caved in at this point. The only thing negotiable is that both the people who are manning these blockades and the Wet'suwet'en people are saying, you pull out and then we'll talk. We're not giving you anything until we know that you're gone, until you're out of our territory. And to be clear, this isn't just the RCMP like being there. They arrested people. They put guns to people's heads. They assaulted people. All of this stuff. And, so when Justin Trudeau and some of the other folks from this in front of the House of Commons make the overture. Now, there's no question that Andrew Scheer, the opposition leader, the conservative, he flat out saying, no, bust heads, drag him out of there. 2 days later, Justin Trudeau starts sounding like Andrew Scheer. It's the whole thing of Trudeau talking out of two sides of his face could not be more clear. Now, one of the things that the undercurrent of what's been happening there has been some of the Indian Act chiefs, these band councils, these Canadian federally recognized councils and chiefs, whatever. They call them grand chiefs. They have all kinds of illustrious names. They've come out and they've somewhat condemned the blockades, including one of the quote unquote grand chiefs from Kanehsatake. And he came out and condemned the blockades and said they should be taken down. So the Mohawk people of Kanehsatake they blocked him. They wouldn't let him in his office. They basically, they literally scared the crap out of this guy. So then he makes an apology. Oh, I guess I shouldn't have said that. I didn't really consult with my people. Yeah, you think? But this is the nature of these guys whose only power doesn't come from an election or electorate. It comes from the fact that the federal governments recognize them and give them their power. These band council elections, you'd be lucky if 20 or 30% even participate in those elections. Why? Because it's not our way. It's just not our culture. This whole idea of voting for these that's not a traditional process. It's not only a flawed process. Hell, it's a flawed process that Canada and the United States use. And we damn sure aren't using it. And so the small percentage of people, and I mentioned this before, on the U.S. side, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, what they consider a valid election is when somebody wins with a majority of only 30% of participation. So, and I take it back, not a majority, the largest minority. Whoever wins the most votes in an election, and the threshold is only 30% of participation. It's pretty dismal. And why is it so low? Because we don't vote. Even Seneca Nation, there's like 7,000 or 8,000 Senecas. There's only about 1,600 people that vote in the elections. And that's a big turnout compared to Akwesasne or Kanehsatake or Six Nations. It's kind of sad. It isn't sad, really. What it is the overwhelming majority of Native people, their vote of confidence is demonstrated by not voting. It's just that simple. But then you have this notion of the Canadian federally recognized leadership. All right, so that's the status. We'll see. Honestly, I expect that the RCMP is probably going to pull out of Wet'suwet'en territory, and the pipeline workers. At some point, the calculation is this: is it worth putting that pipeline through for a private company to sell their natural gas cheaply and easily to Asia, and have all of the rail shut down? I posted a comment on Facebook today. It says, wouldn't it be interesting if somebody could do a scientific evaluation on the environmental benefits of these rail lines being blocked for 2 or 3 weeks? I think that'd be, I'd like to know, maybe there's none. I find it hard to believe that there's no positive benefit, at least to the environment. It'd be an interesting, it'd be an interesting test, put it that way. So again, that's the status of things up there, and I bring it up and I frame it in that way because it's related to the big story. What I've really got to talk about that broke today. I started getting phone calls in the 6 o'clock hour this morning, and the phone calls was about the feds the Marshal Service, FBI, local police, and the Cayuga Nation Police, which are all white guys too. I mean, all of these non-native police force personnel going into Cayuga territory to demolish buildings that Clint Halftown, the federally recognized leader, has not been able to assert control over. So they didn't even run people out. They went in with all of these armed, literally like paramilitary police force again, and bulldozers, contractors with bulldozers to demolish buildings. Now, they demolished the store, and this has been a point of contention because the stores continue to operate even though Clint Halftown, who and I'll get into who Clint Halftown is and how he got his federal recognition. Clint Halftown has not been able to shut these guys down. He's tried any number of things. In fact, the local police would not respond to Clint Halftown's desire to run these people out. They just we're not gonna get involved in that. Well, because the federal law enforcement agencies got involved, or the marshals, which are really processors, but because the federal agencies got involved, the local police had to respond. So they go in and they pave the way, and it's kind of interesting because they go in to bulldoze a smoke shop that the federally recognized leaders couldn't control. Boy, that seems to ring a bell. When did that happen before? Oh, yeah, Onondaga. Yeah, the seat of the central fire of the Haudenosaunee. Yeah, the Onondaga Chiefs. Yeah, they're federally recognized too. And they used cops and then went in with bulldozers and bulldozed all of the stores that they didn't feel were compliant with their authority. So now this isn't even a new idea. Now, Clint Halftown gives some prepared statement. Wow, we demolished these in the interest of public safety. No, you didn't. The next part of his statement made it clear. They demolished these things because they didn't want any of the resistance to him to have anything to cling on to. They demolished a store, a gas station and smoke shop. I don't know what they did with inventory. No idea. But they went in and demolished it. They demolished their sugar shack, an ice cream stand. They demolished the daycare center, which was operational. I mean, during the week, there were kids in this thing normally. I guess that's the reason for doing it in the wee nighttime, early morning hours, to do it before kids were in there. At least, right? So they demolished that. They demolished a bunch of cabins, and they demolished the longhouse. Now, I say longhouse because that's what it was, but it oftentimes wasn't called a longhouse, and I'll get into that a little bit as we go forward too. So, who are these people who were the resistance? Well, I got to explain that too. But let me back this thing up to what federal recognition is and who's played the big hand in as far as Haudenosaunee territories. There's one player that has had their hand in all of this federal recognition stuff. And that's Onondaga. Yeah, that's the Onondaga Nation. And their attorneys, Joe Heath in particular. Now, before Joe Heath, the Onondagas got really involved in the Oneida federal recognition process. And they defied the Condole chiefs, the Haudenosaunee, the Confederacy recognized Condole chiefs of the Oneida Nation. They defied them, and they went to bat for Ray Halbritter to get federally recognized. And they said, well, he needs to be recognized as the Oneida Nation of New York. That's the Onondaga Nation saying this. And they went to bat, and sure enough, Ray Halbritter became federally recognized. He was awarded this privilege of being named the leader of the Oneida Nation by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Not by the Oneida people, but who encouraged that to happen? Oren Lyons. They used letters from Leon Shenandoah. They used all of their legal resources, the Indian Law Resource Center, Louis Bruce, and a whole bunch of. I don't even think Joe Heath was. He was probably still doing stuff with the ACLU or the Lawyers Guild or something in New York. But yeah, so they managed to get Ray Halbritter federally recognized. Then they try to get his recognition pulled, and they try to place this other dope in there. And that doesn't work. So let me think. So they got somebody federally recognized, then tried to influence the Bureau of Indian Affairs to pull that recognition and put somebody else in there, and that's where they failed. So that's why Ray Hallbritter today is there. He's federally recognized for the Oneida Nation leadership because of Onondaga, but they have a falling out, and now Onondaga, now they'll speak ill of Ray Hallbritter, but they're the ones who they were the kingmakers, Orrin in particular. So that's what happened there. So what's that have to do with Cayuga? Well, Clint Halftown was also federally recognized via Onondaga. Onondaga basically said, no, he's the Cayuga chief. I mean, there were other people involved, Deuce Isaacs and others, but Clint was young. As some of these people, passed on, Clint was left. And of the originals that Onondaga, certified as the Haudenosaunee chiefs. So Clint Halftown was federally recognized again and fully supported by the Onondaga Nation until he decided that his best option for trying to do something and reclaim land and build the financial resources was to partner with Ray Hallbritter, the fallen angel. So he teams up with Ray Hallbritter, and now Onondaga says, no, we're gonna have your recognition pulled. Yeah, again, wasn't so easy the second time either. And so now Joe Heath is involved. Now Joe Heath he's promoting this group that he calls the Cayuga Chiefs. Calls them the traditional, the Haudenosaunee Chiefs. And most of this is a crock. Half the people are in the wrong clans. They're duplication of titles, either from Six Nations. It is really a sham. But he's going to try to get the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and he's convinced the Cayugas, oh, we can win this. I'm a lawyer. I know this stuff. We can go to the Bureau of Indian Affairs and we can get this Chiefs Council federally recognized, and we'll get rid of Clint Halftown. Well, the thing about the Bureau of Indian Affairs, they got caught into some legal proceedings a number of years ago, and they said we cannot create a void in tribal government, so we can't just pull somebody out. We have to have, and I'm not defending the Bureau of Indian Affairs. They're just a bunch of bullshit artists anyway. But so here you have it. You've got Joe Heath and his chiefs. I call them the Heath Chiefs. So you got Joe Heath with his crew putting on, as contestants in the BIA beauty contest against Clint Halftown. Now, Clint Halftown's not a prize package either. I mean, he's a bit of a bumbling guy. I mean, he's kind of, really supported by his mom. He is not exactly what you would, picture as the shining example of leadership. But he's federally recognized. Well, at some point, the feds do back off of that federal, and they said, well, we recognize him, but they wanted to not necessarily certify how much authority he had. It was kind of so they didn't pull recognition, but they wouldn't certify his recognized leadership. So they created the opportunity for this beauty contest. And guess what? Joe Heath and Onondaga, you lost again. Yeah, you failed miserably. And so while this is going on, there's been this division within Cayuga. Clint Halftown is running most of the businesses, including their cigarette factory and that kind of stuff, and cigarette distribution, and one of the smoke shops and gas stations. The other one, however, Joe's Heath Chiefs were running or had control of. And so what did they do? They lined their pockets. They built houses for themselves, bought properties that were not Cayuga properties. These were purchases in their own name. Two of them. Carl Hill buys a nice house. Sam George gets a nice house. Then they submit, and they do renovations on the house with this money. They're literally embezzling money from this other smoke shop. When they don't pay property taxes, so now they're trying to get the smoke shop to cover property taxes on there. I mean, it's a debacle. Others step up and embezzle money too. Eventually, a more solid group of people get in there and take control of the smoke shop. And honestly, they try to do the right thing. they start trying to do some programs or reinvigorate programs that had been abandoned, including some ag programs. They tap trees and do sugar. They have orchards. And they're distributing food. They're doing some language programs. Again, build a daycare, and they built a longhouse. But so their relationship with the Heath chiefs is strained because Joe Heath is contacting the lawyer representing these guys saying, look, they need to turn over the smoke shop back over to the chiefs. The only way we're going to beat Clint Halftown in this battle of federal recognition is to prove that the chiefs are the only legitimate authority there. So they got to turn over. They got to turn over all the financial records. They got to turn over all control of the assets of the Cayuga territory there to the chiefs. Now these guys already went through this once, and they said, "No, we're not doing that again." So they refused. So now you've got like a third group. So you got Clint Halftown and his group, his mom and his group. Then you got Joe Heath and his group, stacked up, built up this Cayuga Chiefs Council. Some of them who have been indifferent, guys like Justin Bennett, who was a part of it and then not a part of it. They called them a unity council at one point. But then you got this group who's still running one of these smoke shops, who's like trying to creep some space. And they said, no, we're not going to turn over everything to you guys. We don't trust you. And the tensions between the Heath chiefs, this traditional council, and the group that's living there on the premises, living in the houses, running these businesses, taking care of raising children. By all accounts, doing pretty noble stuff as far as I'm concerned. But they're at odds with Joe Heath and the group trying to win federal recognition, over Clint Halftown. And it ain't going well because these guys are mired in their own controversy. Like I said, having embezzled money and all kinds of other stuff. And so the tension's there. So now Joe's drafting these letters for these chiefs councils to condemn the manager of the smoke shop, to condemn anybody else who's doing employees, and really trying to throw the people who are there under a bus. So what it means is the people who are there running the smoke shop, the daycare, doing all of these things, they're like the odd men out. They're not in Clint Halftown's camp, and they aren't really in the other camp. Although, this is where it gets kind of tough. They certainly lean more towards the Heath chiefs because they know they're not ever going to be able to work with Clint Halftown. That's kind of their view. I don't know that the Heath chiefs are the best option for them. So here's what they do. They keep one of those Heath chiefs, Sam George, the guy who bought himself a nice house and tried to get them to pay his property taxes for him. They keep him on payroll. For what? As a chief. So he's like a professional chief. He just gets paid from the smoke. So he gets paid at the smoke shop that the rest of these chiefs are trying to wrestle. And he just shows up every week and gets his check. So this group has not necessarily completely divorced themselves from those who are fighting for this federal recognition, and ultimately lose. So in the end, Joe Heath's effort totally fails. It's a miserable debacle of a failure. And Clint gets his recognition confirmed, and then they appeal it and it gets confirmed again. So for the last, year, 8 months, Clint's been like sending eviction notices out. So the people who are left there, they don't really have the full support. They certainly don't got Joe Heath in their corner. And they don't, even though they're paying Chief Sam George, he's not doing a damn thing for them. He's not out there advocating for them. He just shows up every week and gets a paycheck. So they're kind of in limbo. They're living in houses that are Cayuga Nation houses. They're employed under this, the revenue coming in from smoke shop and cigarette and gas sales. And it's almost like they're buying time, and they're living their lives. They're raising their children and that kind of stuff under a constant threat that Clint Halftown, as the federally recognized leader, is going to come in and give them all the boots. And in many ways, they're holding up. They're saying, no, we're gonna fight him. We're gonna fight him. And look, I went out there and I talked to them. I said, I don't know how you're gonna fight him. I mean, if they come in with cops, which is exactly what they did this morning, and they didn't get met with a whole lot of resistance. They came in with feds and cops and bulldozers and destroyed everything. So now, though, the people who were working in the smoke shop, the people who have been, operating the daycare and providing, services to the kids and doing language programs. Oh yeah, let me go back up to the Longhouse. So the other thing related to this Longhouse, this is one is really rich. So they build this Longhouse. Actually, ironically, they hire a contractor. I think that's the thing that Sam George did. Sam George contracted somebody to come in and build a Longhouse. So white guys came in and built a Longhouse for them. Yeah. It's not like we don't have builders, native builders, but no. So they hire this builder who's going to come in and build a Longhouse for them. Joe Heath notifies them that they can't call it a Longhouse because Sid Hill, the Tatadaho, the Grand Poobah of the Haudenosaunee, won't recognize and won't sanction their Longhouse. So Joe Heath tells them that you can't call it a Longhouse. So they've been calling it a schoolhouse this whole time. It's a freaking Longhouse. I mean, it's a Longhouse. Now they were it was a Longhouse until this morning. But they were using this Longhouse for ceremonies, for doing language classes, for teaching kids, for doing things with the kids. I mean, but they weren't calling it a Longhouse. They had to call it a schoolhouse. Well, today, they were calling it a Longhouse. I mean, they should have been calling it a Longhouse the whole time. But that was one of the buildings that Clint's bulldozers went in and bulldozed. And I'll tell you, this was a pretty nice building. As far as Longhouses go, granted, it was built by white guys. But as far as Longhouses go, this was a pretty nice one. It was. Now it's a pile of rubble. So that's what Clint did. I had to tell you the Longhouse story because, again, Onondaga imposing its will, even on these guys. And again, even Sam George, their chief, their one paid chief, part of the Joe Heath group, he was forbidden. He couldn't call it a Longhouse. He had to call it a schoolhouse. So all that's gone. Now, there's still these Cayugas and others, non-Cayugas who live there and work there, that are still living there. And now it's just a waiting game. And frankly, they're holding up and they're vowing to defend their right to be there. But I don't know what's going to happen. But the likelihood is, either Clint's going to try to starve them out, or he's going to go in with force and force them out. Now, I don't think he's going to bulldoze these houses. These houses aren't sitting within this collective of, this Cayuga property. So it's a little bit of a different situation. Now, is Clint going to go after, Carl Hill and his beautiful house that the smoke shop paper? Is he going to go after Sam George? Don't know. Is he going to go after individuals and try to call them, charge him with theft? I mean, he's already threatened that. So who knows where this goes from here? All right, we're at the bottom of the hour. So I'm going to take a break, but I want to come back because I got to, explain that this isn't just bad guys versus good guys. There's some people who are relatively innocent caught in the crossfire of two groups vying not for the will of the Cayuga people, but I'll talk about that a little bit too, but vying for the federal authority that backs them up. And Onondaga was at the center of it. All right, we'll take a break and we'll come back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. All right, thanks for coming back. Hey, a quick shout out to my sponsors. I want to thank Ross and Holly John and the RJE family of businesses, Eric White and ERW Enterprises, the folks at Grand River Enterprises, and the folks at Cat Res. I want to thank you guys for stepping up and supporting what I do here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about sponsorship. Thanks, appreciate it, but I do need to get right back into it. So, I mean, part of the reason I got to tell the story the truth of this thing is because I know a lot of people are pitting this thing as somehow band councils or tribal councils versus traditionals, and it isn't that. This group of chiefs that Joe Heath promoted, they are not this bastion of traditional culture. In fact, there's clashes with some of those guys and the folks in Six Nations, as a matter of fact. It's not a smooth thing. And the folks who are the victims here, the ones who are actually living there and whose kids now are living in fear, I mean, they are kind of the victims. The kids are the true victims here. In fact, the kids of the people who are involved with doing this harm and damage, those kids are damaged too. I mean, so they're the real victims here. But this isn't like just this idea of innocent traditionalists being persecuted for their beliefs. No, this is about power that two groups were vying for. Joe Heath and the Onondaga-backed group claiming to be chiefs and clan mothers, and they're not. I mean, they're not. But this Onondaga-backed, Joe Heath-backed group lost trying to get federal recognition. They participated in a BIA beauty contest and lost. And they lost to Clint Halftown, which that probably wasn't even that easy to lose to him because Clint Halftown's no prize either. And the victims here, they're not completely innocent either because they were kind of backing the Heath Chiefs and certainly keeping one of them on payroll. So it's complicated. And here's the real bad part. We're the freak of the Cayuga people. I mean, I don't know how many enrolled Cayugas there are, but there's got to be, 500, 600, 700 of them. I got to think there's that many, at least, maybe 1,000. I'll tell you what they're doing. They're catching whatever check comes their way. So when Clint Halftown, with the multi-million-dollar operations that he has control of by virtue of being federally recognized, they're sending out checks. It's not a lot of money, but the Cayugas have not had much. And until Clint and company went in there and started acquiring property and building some businesses with his relationship with with Ray Hallbritter, there wasn't a whole lot going on. They had a Cayuga Nation office. They had one right here in the village of Gowanda. They had one up in North Collins, I think. But they didn't have a whole lot going on. Most Cayugas were scattered amongst other territories. And you know what? They still are. There's not a whole lot of Cayugas living out there in Clint's camp or this other camp. And in fact, the ones who were in this camp, who had all of their enterprises and their buildings and their community buildings destroyed, I mean, there was a number of them, but it wasn't hundreds. So most of the Cayugas just sit back and let this thing play out. They aren't stepping up. So Clint doesn't represent the will of the people. I mean, this is the debate that we had about, free, prior, and informed consent. Well, who gives consent? Well, Clint doesn't have to provide consent. He doesn't need consent. You know what he has? Federal recognition. And of course, you've got the Heath Chiefs who, what do they have? They've got the Onondaga Council, the so-called seat of the Confederacy, claiming that they're legitimate, and they're not. And most people know it. I mean, there's people who are sitting as chiefs and clans, and they're not even that clan, and they don't need to be. They just do. They have another clan. They said totally depleted. I mean, it's kind of a bit of a mess. And I know there are calls going out. Why did Clint do this today? I'll tell you why he did it today. He did it today because he figures, well, the Mohawks are all tied up blocking rails for in support of Wet'suwet'en. This is essentially Clint Halftown taking advantage of a conflict happening in other native territories, not supporting it, taking advantage of it. He felt, well, if I do this now, I know no Mohawk warriors are going to come down and protect these people. I mean, and I'm not saying that you would have had this huge influx but there had been. Mohawks had come down and said, look, let's try to keep the peace here. And they tried to reach out to both sides and keep them from doing something drastic. And look, nobody's been killed, although I think Clint Halftown, who has his own little police force, all hired white cops that he hired to make his own little Cayuga Nation police force. It's all white cops. They've got like 7 people they arrested or detained for a variety of reasons. And you know what they're going to do? They're going to try to charge them and do it in a way that, that the outside law enforcement recognizes these charges. I mean, it's really a whole twisted thing. So, I mean, look, there are people there who are in danger. And, I know I've seen some call-outs that say, people should send people down. I heard AIM say, well, we need to send some people. We need to send some warriors down there. I've heard people say, we need to send money. We need to send food. I don't know what the answer is. I'm just trying to tell you what's transpired there. And at the end of the day, The biggest problem here is federal recognition. So I throw this out almost as a cautionary tale to my friends out in Hawaii who have people there trying to sell them out for federal recognition. Yeah, I mean, we got Hawaiians out there saying, look, if we could become federally recognized as a tribe, we could wield this kind of authority. Because now you don't have to worry about the consent of the people. Throw the people some money, and that's what Clinton says. Well, everybody who cashes my check, they're my supporters. It doesn't mean they really are. It means that they haven't had crap, so they finally get a few bucks, or maybe they get some vegetables or something like that. So he buys their silence. Same thing, Ray Halbritter. I mean, that Clinton learned all this from Halbritter. Of course, the bulldozing, he learned that from Onondaga. Onondaga, they were the first ones to go in there and bulldoze a bunch of stores they couldn't control. Well, that's exactly what Clinton. So, I mean, it's ironic that you've got Joe Heath and Onondaga backing the opposition, and then Clinton Halfdown does exactly what Onondaga did. You know, they brought police in to beat the crap out of people, lined up state police. There was a whole trial about it. Lined up state police. They tried to buy them off and pay them off for silence. The state did. The state offered a settlement to all the people who were brutalized when Onondaga called the state police in. So you've got these federally recognized leaders who use cops. They use federal agents. They use federal agencies and state and local police to enforce their will. What I try to say is that this is not unlike what's happening on the Canadian side. Look, part of the problem that exists in Wet'suwet'en territory is again the federally recognized band councils are saying, "Oh yeah, put a pipeline through here. Yeah, it'll give me money. It'll give us jobs." So they sell out, and then you have the people saying no, but even some of those people get caught up in calling themselves British Columbians and Canadians. Even some of the traditional chiefs from Wet'suwet'en territory are saying stuff like, "Oh yeah, well, all Canadians need to be treated equally," and of course, this goes all the way to the House of Commons in Canada, and everybody's talking about all Canadians, all Canadians. No, you're not recognizing that there are Native people on both sides of that imaginary line who say, "No, I'm not an American," and "No, I'm not a Canadian." But see, here's the problem. And I'll give an example of it. Seneca Nation hires a white guy to do an economic impact study. In the very beginning of that study, he uses language where he says that, and I'm going to read from this thing. He says, meaning the Seneca Nation, they are part and parcel of U.S. federalism. The division of governing authority across states, tribes, counties, municipalities, and districts. So they hire a guy who's supposed to be an expert on Indian country and economic development. And he says tribal governments are part and parcel of U.S. federalism. Now, I know not everybody knows what that means. What he means is that tribes are part of the division of governmental authority, like federal, state, county, municipal, district, whatever, townships. Nestled in there somewhere between states and counties, this guy is claiming that's where tribal government fits. That our governments, that our nations, and look, I know that's the way it feels sometimes, especially with tribal councils and band councils. Well, on the Canadian side, that is exactly what the Indian Act has created. This notion that these tribal governments, these band councils, are a division of Canadian federal governance, Canadian governments. The whole system of dividing government from federal to provincial to municipal, and somewhere in that. And in fact, for all intents and purposes, the biggest effort on the Canadian side is to turn band councils into merely municipal governments. They're calling it that, municipalization. And of course the big fear is that, with it comes things like property taxes and all kinds of that. But even if it doesn't have all that stuff, the problem is, if we look at ourselves as just some sort of subgroup of Canadians or some subgroup of U.S. citizenship, our distinction's gone. So these guys who vie, not just for federal recognition of their territories or of their quote unquote nations, but these guys who vie for federal recognition as leaders, what they're trying to get is the power that the federal government. Now, the federal government is not going to give them, they're not going to recognize him as sovereign. No, in fact, even in the articles in the paper today, they also make, the Cayuga Nation is still under federal jurisdiction. Of course they are. I mean, here's the thing that I also got to mention. All of the reporting keeps saying the Cayuga Nation went in and demolished these buildings. No, they didn't. I mean, well, if they did, then define what the Cayuga Nation is. Because if the Cayuga Nation is just what the federal government says it is, if it's not the people, look, we get into this debate here in Seneca territory too. What is the nation? Is it the people, or is it just the government? And in these cases, is it the people, or is it what the federal government says it is the government? Is the nation the federally recognized council? Is that what the nation is, or is it the people? Well, in Cayuga territory, every one of these stories written in all these newspapers, they keep saying the nation came in and demolished. No, Clinton Halftown gave the order for these things to be demolished. He did it, not the Cayuga people. No, the Cayuga people are silent. Why? Because we're not going to speak out too much. We may not get the next month's check. And look, I know I'm pissing some people off right now. And why is it pissing people off? Because what I'm saying is true. The Cayuga people could step up and fix this. They've got to push back against the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Speak your mind. Do you support Clinton Halftown? Are you saying because you get a check from the Cayuga Nation, meaning Clinton Halftown, that you support what he's doing? Because if you are, then the rest of Cayugas don't have a leg to stand on. But if you're just sitting back and being silent, and I don't know, the vast majority of Cayugas may support Clinton Halftown. And if that's the case, then those people who are standing in his way, if the vast majority of Cayugas support what Clinton Halftown just did, I'll tell you, in Onondaga, the Onondaga people didn't speak up when the Chiefs bulldozed the store. I mean, a few people did, but not the vast majority. They didn't speak up when the Chiefs brought in state police to beat the crap out of people who were against the deal they were trying to make with the state on taxation. The vast majority of Oneidas just want the check. They want to get free casino bucks at Turning Stone. I mean, I gotta tell you, at least here in Seneca territory, people are willing to speak out. I'm not saying they take the action they need to necessarily, but if they're going to condemn somebody, they're going to condemn somebody. Their silence isn't paid for, because they will hold the Senecas accountable if they try to take away whatever benefits they get from being Seneca. I'm not praising the Seneca Nation. The structure is terrible. I mean, the people are great. But most of the tribal governments, even those that claim to be, and I use the word tribal not as a compliment, and I say it tongue in cheek because I think tribalism is like primitive. I mean, it's like animals. It's like monkeys. And when I see what people call tribal government, it's a debacle. We don't embrace our culture. We don't embrace our history. We don't even know what the clan system is. We say things. I mean, I heard people say, well, we have a chief system. Or the Seneca Nation replaced the chief system with a constitutional government. Well, we didn't have a chief system. We had a clan system. And it wasn't even a clan system the way people think about it. The clans aren't the animals that are that people associate with. It isn't just bear, wolf, and turtle. It isn't just snipe, beaver, and deer. That's not what the clans are. It's the families. It's the 49 families of that circle wampum. That's what the Haudenosaunee is. It's those 49 families, and then one title that isn't a family. It's the Tadadaho title, the one that Sid Hill, the one who says I'm not going to allow you to call your building a longhouse. That guy. And it's not that guy. It's that title that he sits in. But then there's 49 other titles. And there should be more. Frankly, the Tuscaroras should be recognized they should add more families because they have clans. They have families that are tied to specific titles. But we don't even do that. My friend Jacques Day, that's what he was all about. He's saying, look, we need to trace back. We need to know what of those 49 families we are a part of. I mean, I hear people say, oh, I'm a bear, I'm a turtle, I'm a wolf. Yeah, but if you're Mohawk or Oneida, there are three titles. There are three families that are associated with each one of those animal totems, the bear, wolf, and turtle. And it isn't that there's not just three clans. There's 9 families. There's 9 titles. We haven't lost our ways. We've lost our way. I mean, we were people who worked diligently to reach consensus on issues. Now we say, well, we'll have an election. We'll put out a referendum. And whichever choice, whatever person gets the most votes wins. It doesn't matter if it's a dismal showing. It doesn't matter if it's, 50% of 30% participation. So if it doesn't matter if it's only 15% of the population. Doesn't matter. We're just going to go and check the box. Yeah, we held an election. This person won. This issue won. We're going to do this. We're not going to do that. We approve this. We're not going to approve that. We don't work together as communities, as families. We've lost so much of what defines us as Haudenosaunee. And the thing that undermines it the most is the power that comes with federal recognition. So if you can get the Bureau of Indian Affairs to recognize you, you don't need who needs all that consensus stuff? Once you can, pass the test, and in situations like Cayuga, there wasn't even an election. There was no referendum. It was 2 parties arguing their case in front of the Bureau of Indian Affairs as to who wins the prize. Who gets the tiara, the roses, and the sash across them because they won the BIA beauty contest? And believe it or not, Clint Halfton won it. And so what did he do? He brought in the feds, he brought in the cops, and he brought in the bulldozers. So, and this is what's tough. And look, am I pissing people off here today? I'm sure I am. But the problem is that this is where we've been sucked into. We've been sucked into this crap, into this BIA federal recognition, beauty contest, into these, and into no longer having governance that is responsible to their people, but governs with the might that the federal government gives them, Canadian or U.S. I once spoke at a conference at Arizona State University. It was called "Who Decides You're Real? Fixing the Federal Recognition Process." I got invited. And the person who invited me says, "What the hell are you asking me to come to this thing for? I don't even agree, not just with the system of federal recognition, but the idea of federal recognition. I oppose." She says, "Well, people should hear your perspective." Well, and I've mentioned this on the show before. And I went, and I spoke. And in fact, Ross John was there, as a matter of fact. By the way, before I forget, happy birthday, Ross John. Today's his birthday. I just got to mention it fast. But no, Ross and his wife, Holly, they're sitting in the audience because they had business in Arizona on the same time that this conference was taking place. So I speak at this conference, and I got a standing ovation. What did I talk about? I talk about not getting federal recognition. I talked about the fact that not only is the Mohawk Nation not federally recognized, the word isn't even proper, and that's half of the problem. Half of the problem. We're calling ourselves Mohawks. We're not Mohawks. We're Gunyakahaga. We're the people of the land of Flint. We're not Senecas. We're Onondaga, the people of the mountains or the big hills. But we got sucked into these labels that they're putting on us, and we call ourselves that. So we don't even define ourselves. Somebody else, they call us Indians. I mean, they call us nations. And yet, who gets to decide who the nation is? Apparently, the Bureau of Indian Affairs does. The Bureau of Indian Affairs got to decide who the Oneida Nation was. The Bureau of Indian Affairs decided who the Cayuga Nation is. And at the end of the day, when push comes to shove, if you don't have your own people supporting the governing structures in your community, like Onondaga, they bring the cops in because it's the Bureau of Indian Affairs that recognizes the authority. And I've talked to police departments, and they said, well, we got whatever the feds tell us. Whoever the feds tell us is the leader, that's who we got to go with, even if we don't agree with them. I talked to a state senator, or maybe it was a congressman or a state senator, I don't know, but a guy in central New York, in the Utica area, about Ray Halbert. He's, oh, Ray Halbert, he's a scam, he's a fraud, he's a fake. I says, yeah, but you recognize him as the leader. And well, I have to recognize him as a leader because the federal government tells me. So he's a fraud, and that his power comes from a fraudulent place. But you don't have enough gumption and enough will to stand up and say to the Interior Department, I have a problem with recognizing his authority that you say I have to recognize. And so this is where we're left, folks. What's happening in Cayuga is a mess. It is a crisis. And it's not just a crisis that you can just fix. Clinton Halftown is a fraud. But the other group that was trying to get federal recognition, they were frauds too. Joe Heath's involvement with trying to create the same mess in Cayuga that Onondaga created in Oneida, that has never been healed up in Oneida. The rift between the Oneida Council of Chiefs, the condoled, and in fact, the ripple effect of what Onondaga did to screw up Oneida has even caused division amongst the other communities, even within the community where these chiefs resided. Clinton Halftown was recognized by the Onondaga Council as a chief. The Cayuga people didn't pull him out, although there were Cayuga people who were pissed off at him. I mean, some of the tension that grew out of Clinton Halftown's rise to power and money was tied to greed and corruption. But he wasn't the only one that was greedy and corrupt. And that's the problem. So as in the wake of this, or not even the wake, in the midst of these blockades in support of the Wet'suwet'en people, standing up for a good cause, the protection of their land, we end up seeing the same thing playing out on the Canadian side as the U.S. side. This idea of who the Canadian government tries to empower, who represents the authority of a community. So when I bring up things like the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, free, prior, and informed consent, the problem with that is somebody else is going to decide what amounts to consent, what constitutes consent. As far as Canada or the federal government is concerned, or the U.S. federal government is concerned, I don't need to know the consent of the people. Just whatever the leaders that we recognize say, that's consent enough for us. So if the band councils say, "Yeah, we like to have a pipeline go through," that's consent. It doesn't matter what the people think. And see, that's the flaws of not only the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, because at the end of the day, if the United Nations is saying this is the minimum standard for the rights of indigenous people, but then the countries that are violating those rights get to say, well, we're going to tell you who the indigenous people are. We're going to get to tell you who their leadership is. We empower them. We don't empower the people. We don't want to deal with millions of Indians. We just want a few people that can sign a check. We want a few people who can sign a contract. We want a few people who can sign off on permission to do a pipeline or drill or mine or frack or any of that stuff. I feel terrible for what's going on in Cayuga Territory. And I wish those people who have been, essentially the final resistance to Clinton Halftown, because trust me, Joe Heath's chiefs, they're not out there. They're not resisting. They lost the beauty contest. So they threw the towel in. Oh, except for Sam George. No, he still collects the check. Well, sorry, Sam, your checks aren't coming anymore. I don't know how you're going to pay the property tax on the house you bought with Cayuga money. So no, I feel bad for the people who are left there, because I don't know what the answer is. You know, as long as Clint Halftown is the federally recognized leader, the will of the people doesn't matter. And as long as the Cayuga people remain silent, see, in Gunazadage, when that Grand Chief started calling down the roadblocks, the people rose up and gave him hell. They put him back in his place. Well, kind of. He's still the Grand Chief, so I guess they didn't really do what they should have done. Reined in his quote unquote federal authority. It's the people fighting the pipeline in Wet'suwet'en territory, not the band council. And it's not even the hereditary chiefs. They're supporting those people, but they've been indifferent. You know, they start using some. We better figure out who the hell we are. Cayuga Nation's a mess. It's been Fed wrecked. And that's all I got to say on that. I want to thank you for listening. Look, I look for your comments, and look, if I angered you, then lash out. Let's have the conversation. But you know what? Let's get people involved in this conversation so we can take action. I went out to Cayuga territory, by the way, when all the white people were trying to do, protest against them even being there. I stood there with Native people from all over the Confederacy, from all over, as these white racists drove by in their big line of trucks with their hate signs and their all their white power stuff. I was proud to stand with the Cayuga people. I haven't been proud to stand with the Cayuga people in a while, but I'd love to go back. I'd love to stand. And look, I'm not afraid to go out there. Clint Halftown or not, but I'm not going to go out there just for nothing. All right, folks, that's it. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. We'll see you back here on Tuesday. Yahweh.